The most dangerous moments are not loud. They arrive quietly, wrapped in confidence that feels settled, unquestioned, and complete. Nothing appears urgent. Nothing seems worth reconsidering. And that false calm is what makes them so dangerous. When people believe they already understand a situation, something subtle happens. Attention relaxes. Awareness fades. The mind stops listening and stops adjusting because it assumes there is nothing left to learn. That is exactly what happened when eyes landed on Bruce Lee. He didn't trigger an alarm. He didn't demand caution. He didn't look like a problem that needed solving. Everything about him felt familiar, manageable, and safe. That assessment felt reasonable. It felt correct. It wasn't. That certainty marked the moment awareness disappeared, and once awareness is gone, mistakes begin to form quietly, long before anyone realizes something has gone wrong. People rarely underestimate out of disrespect. In most cases, underestimation grows out of comfort. It appears when the mind decides that a situation feels familiar enough to stop examining closely. When something does not challenge expectations, does not look unusual, or does not immediately signal danger, attention begins to soften. The brain, always searching for efficiency, shifts into a quieter mode where less energy is spent on observation and more trust is placed in assumption. This shift happens quickly and almost invisibly. Someone looks ordinary, calm, or unimposing, and the mind fills in the gaps without conscious effort. There is no sense of urgency, no internal warning, and no reason to slow down. The conclusion forms silently. Nothing important here. No threat detected, no adjustment required. Once that conclusion settles, awareness loosens its grip. In that relaxed state, people stop evaluating. Evaluation requires effort. It demands curiosity, openness, and a willingness to admit that something may not be as simple as it appears. Assumption, on the other hand, feels efficient. It allows the mind to move forward without friction. When people assume, they feel certain without needing proof. And certainty feels comfortable. This is how attention drifts. Not because someone decides to ignore another person, but because the mind believes it already understands enough. Familiarity replaces observation. Predictability replaces curiosity. The moment a person is mentally categorized, active attention is withdrawn. The eyes may still see, but the mind has already moved on. When this happened with Bruce Lee, it did not come from arrogance or malice. It came from the quiet confidence of assumption. He did not fit the image that demanded caution. He did not behave in a way that disrupted expectations. Nothing about his presence forced people to reconsider their initial judgment. And because nothing challenged that judgment, it solidified. Once that internal dismissal occurred, attention shifted elsewhere. Conversations continued, focus scattered. People relaxed into the belief that the moment had already been understood. That relaxation created space. And space, when filled with assumption, becomes an opening. What makes this process especially powerful is that it feels reasonable. The mind believes it is being practical rather than careless. Why examine something that seems obvious? Why question what appears settled? This logic feels sound, yet it rests on incomplete information. The mind has not confirmed reality. It has merely accepted familiarity as truth. People are no longer present in the moment. They are present in their interpretation of it. This difference matters. Presence allows adaptation. Interpretation locks perception in place. Once locked, it resists change until something forces it open again. This is why underestimation is so dangerous. It creates the illusion of control while quietly removing awareness. People believe they are safe because they feel informed, when in reality they have stopped gathering information altogether. They are no longer watching. They are remembering what they think they already know. The dismissal of Bruce Lee did not happen publicly or verbally. It happened internally, where attention quietly withdrew. And that withdrawal mattered more than any spoken word. It meant that those around him were no longer responsive to subtle shifts, cues, or changes in the situation. They believed the moment was over before it had even begun. This is the opening underestimation creates. Not a dramatic mistake, but a silent one. A pause in awareness. A gap between reality and perception. When attention leaves, assumption takes its place. An assumption, once accepted, rarely questions itself. People did not stop paying attention because they wanted to. They stopped because comfort convinced them they could, And in that comfort, the most important thing they could have done was continue observing. They didn't. Bruce Lee did not move to correct the impression forming around him. He did not raise his voice, shift his posture, or attempt to signal importance in any visible way. This was not hesitation, and it was not uncertainty. It was intention. He understood something that most people overlook in moments of judgment. Forcing recognition often strengthens resistance rather than dissolving it. When someone demands to be taken seriously, they tie their value to the approval of others. Bruce Lee refused to do that. Instead of interrupting the narrative that was forming, he allowed it to continue. He let people believe what they wanted to believe. This choice was not passive. It required control. Most people feel an instinctive urge to correct misunderstanding, especially when they sense they are being underestimated. That urge comes from a desire to regain footing, to reassert identity, or to protect ego. Bruce Lee recognized that acting on that impulse would only shift the focus away from what truly mattered. By stepping forward too early, he would have turned the moment into a performance. He would have invited comparison, argument, and explanation. The situation would have become about proving something rather than revealing something. Bruce Lee was not interested in proof. He was interested in clarity. And clarity often emerges only when people are allowed to fully express their assumptions without interference. He understood that misunderstanding has value. It exposes how others think. The way people treat someone they believe is insignificant reveals their internal framework for power. It shows what they respect, what they dismiss, and what they rely on to feel secure. By remaining still, Bruce Lee allowed those internal frameworks to surface clearly and without distortion. This is why he did not correct the impression. Correction would have masked the truth. Silence allowed it to stand fully exposed. People became comfortable in their certainty because no one challenged it. That comfort encouraged honesty. It revealed confidence built on assumption rather than awareness. As certainty settled into the room, Bruce Lee observed quietly. His attention was not fixed on how he was being perceived, but on how others behaved once they believed the situation was settled. He noticed the relaxation that followed judgment. He noticed how people stopped paying attention once they believed there was nothing left to understand. These details mattered far more than the impression itself. Remaining still also preserved his internal balance. Bruce Lee did not allow the external environment to dictate his state. By not stepping forward, he maintained control over what mattered most, his awareness. He did not surrender attention to reaction. He chose observation over engagement. That choice kept him aligned while others drifted into assumption. This approach requires confidence that does not depend on being seen correctly in the moment. Bruce Lee trusted that reality does not need immediate explanation. He understood that situations have a natural tendency to reveal themselves when left uninterrupted. By resisting the urge to intervene, he allowed the moment to develop on its own terms. People often mistake silence for absence. In reality, silence can be a position of strength. It creates space. Space allows behavior to unfold naturally. In that space, patterns emerge that would otherwise remain hidden. Bruce Lee recognized that stepping forward would have collapsed that space too soon. He also understood that once misunderstanding is corrected verbally, it often shifts into defensiveness rather than understanding. People cling more tightly to their assumptions when they feel challenged. By not confronting the impression directly, Bruce Lee avoided triggering that resistance. He allowed the misunderstanding to run its course until it reached its own limit. As the room settled into certainty, Bruce Lee did not rush to reclaim attention. He allowed it to drift away because he knew that attention built on assumption is unstable. When it returns differently. It returns with curiosity rather than certainty, and curiosity is far more valuable than forced respect. He watched quietly while the atmosphere relaxed around him. Not because he was unaware of what was happening, but because he was fully aware. He understood that stepping forward too soon would have interrupted the lesson that was already forming. The misunderstanding was not a threat. It was an opportunity to see the moment clearly. This is why Bruce Lee did not step forward. Not because he lacked confidence, but because he possessed enough of it to wait. As the atmosphere relaxed around him, a quiet divide formed that no one noticed in the moment. While others mentally stepped away, believing the situation had already been resolved, Bruce Lee remained fully present. This difference was subtle, but it mattered more than anything else happening in the room. Presence is not loud. It does not announce itself. It operates quietly, steadily, and without interruption. And when only one side maintains it, the balance begins to shift without a single visible movement. Most people disengage the moment they feel certain. Once the mind decides that nothing unexpected remains, attention loosens. Awareness narrows. The senses continue to function, but they no longer search for information. This disengagement feels natural and harmless. It feels like efficiency. Yet it creates a blind spot. While others relaxed into that blind spot, Bruce Lee stayed alert, not tense, not guarded, but awake. He did not anticipate conflict or prepare for action. He simply continued observing. This is where the silent advantage emerged. When one side remains attentive and the other stops gathering information, the situation changes, even if nothing outwardly shifts. Awareness compounds quietly. Every detail noticed adds clarity. Every pause understood adds control. Meanwhile, assumption creates stagnation. It locks perception into a fixed interpretation and prevents adaptation. The gap between these two states widens without drawing attention to itself. Nothing dramatic marked this transition. There was no change in posture that signaled escalation. No tightening of expressions. No audible tension. The room did not feel charged. That is why the shift went unnoticed. People often expect change to be loud, sudden, or confrontational. They rarely recognize the kind that unfolds silently. As the moment stretched on, Bruce Lee continued to register what others had stopped noticing. He sensed how energy in the room softened, how focus scattered, and how certainty replaced curiosity. These were not threats. They were indicators. They showed him exactly how the moment was being misread by those around him. He did not need to exploit this difference. Simply maintaining awareness was enough. The people nearby believed the moment was finished because nothing demanded their attention anymore. Their minds had moved on to what came next. Conversations resumed. Thoughts drifted. They assumed the situation would continue to follow a familiar pattern. That assumption created a lag. While they mentally stepped forward, Bruce Lee remained anchored in the present. This lag is where advantage forms. When attention leaves, response slows. When awareness fades, perception dulls. People are often unaware they have fallen behind because falling behind does not feel like movement. It feels like standing still. In reality, the moment has continued without them. Bruce Lee did not gain advantage by acting. He gained it by not disengaging. He did not attempt to dominate the situation or redirect it. He simply stayed connected to what was happening as it unfolded. That connection gave him clarity others no longer had. What makes this type of advantage so powerful is that it does not trigger resistance. There was nothing for anyone to push against, no challenge to respond to, no confrontation to prepare for. The room remained calm, even comfortable. That comfort hid the imbalance forming beneath the surface. People often assume that advantage must be seized. In reality, it often accumulates quietly. It belongs to whoever continues paying attention when others stop. Bruce Lee understood that moments do not end when people decide they do. They end when awareness has fully played out. By remaining alert, he stayed ahead of the moment rather than reacting to it. The widening gap between awareness and assumption went unnoticed because it produced no immediate consequence. Yet it shaped everything that followed. Those who believed the moment was over had already surrendered responsiveness. They had traded presence for comfort. Bruce Lee had done the opposite. This is why the balance shifted without movement. Nothing needed to happen externally for change to occur internally. Awareness alone was enough. And because awareness is invisible, the advantage it creates often remains hidden until it is already decisive. The people around him did not realize they had fallen behind because nothing had signaled loss. There was no failure to point to, no mistake to correct. Only later would it become clear that the moment they stopped paying attention was the moment they lost control of the situation. It wasn't over. It was only beginning. Doubt rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with noise, urgency, or confrontation. It enters quietly, almost politely, slipping into the mind when something no longer aligns the way it should. In this moment, it began as a faint sense that the situation was not unfolding according to expectation. Nothing obvious had changed, yet the confidence that once felt effortless started to feel slightly forced, as if it were being maintained rather than naturally held. At first, this feeling was easy to ignore. People are skilled at dismissing doubt when it contradicts certainty. They tell themselves nothing is wrong, that the moment is already understood, that there is no reason to revisit a conclusion they have already accepted. But doubt does not disappear simply because it is ignored. It lingers, growing clearer as it waits for confirmation. What triggered this shift was not aggression, challenge, or confrontation. It was restraint. The absence of reaction became impossible to reconcile with the assumptions that had been made earlier. The situation had been judged as predictable, yet something about it now felt unfinished. The confidence people relied on had assumed a response that never came, and without that response, the narrative began to weaken. The behavior of Bruce Lee did not fit the role that had been assigned to him. He did not move to reclaim attention. He did not adjust himself to match expectation. He did not attempt to correct the misunderstanding forming around him. Instead, he remained composed, unchanged, and entirely unconcerned with how he was being perceived. That calm consistency contradicted the assumptions that had justified dismissal. People expect underestimated individuals to react in familiar ways. They expect defensiveness, irritation, or an attempt to prove worth. When those responses fail to appear, uncertainty begins to surface. The mind struggles to reconcile calm with insignificance. Restraint does not match the image of someone who lacks control. It suggests something deeper that has not yet been accounted for. As this contradiction became more apparent, the story people had built in their minds began to fracture. The narrative had depended on predictability. It relied on the idea that the situation was already complete and required no further attention. But now, attention returned involuntarily. People began to notice details they had previously ignored. Posture, stillness, the absence of urgency. These details did not support the original assumption, and that mismatch created tension. This tension did not feel dramatic. It felt uncomfortable in a quieter way. Confidence that once flowed easily now required effort to maintain. Smiles felt less certain. Reactions slowed. People became more aware of themselves and of the room around them. The certainty they had relied on no longer felt stable, yet they could not point to a clear reason why. The most unsettling part was that nothing had forced this change. No words had challenged them. No actions had demanded reconsideration. The doubt arose entirely from contrast. The contrast between expectation and reality. The contrast between noise and silence. The contrast between assumed weakness and visible self-possession. Restraint has a unique effect on perception. It does not provoke resistance. It invites reflection. When someone refuses to perform according to expectation, it exposes the limits of those expectations. People are left with a choice they did not anticipate. They can either question the assumption they made or cling to it despite growing discomfort. As the moment stretched on, it became harder to ignore the possibility that the initial judgment had been incomplete. The calm in front of them was not passive, it was deliberate. It carried intention without display. That realization arrived slowly, not as a conclusion, but as an awareness that something had been missed. The story people had constructed began to lose coherence. It no longer explained what they were witnessing. When a narrative stops explaining reality, doubt replaces confidence. And once doubt appears, certainty can no longer hold its position. This is how assumptions begin to fail. Not through confrontation, but through contradiction. Not through force, but through presence. The calm that had once been dismissed now demanded reconsideration, not because it insisted on attention, but because it did not need it. By the time this awareness settled, the initial confidence had already weakened. The certainty that once felt unshakable now felt provisional. And in that quiet shift, the foundation of the assumption began to collapse, leaving behind a space where understanding had to be rebuilt. This was the moment the story changed. Not outwardly, but internally. When people begin to realize that they may have underestimated someone, panic is rarely the first emotion they feel. Panic is loud and sudden, but misjudgment collapses quietly. What appears first is confusion, a subtle mental hesitation, a sense that something no longer fits the story the mind had accepted moments earlier. The brain, which had settled into certainty, now finds itself forced to reconsider without preparation. This confusion is disorienting because it challenges a narrative that felt complete. People trust their judgments when those judgments arrive easily. The faster a conclusion forms, the more confident it feels. When that confidence is questioned, the mind scrambles not to find truth, but to restore coherence. It searches for an explanation, that will allow the original belief to survive. Often, that search fails. The confidence that supported the misjudgment was never rooted in evidence. It was rooted in certainty. Certainty feels solid, but it is fragile when unsupported by awareness. Once doubt enters, certainty cannot adapt. It has no flexibility. It either holds or it collapses. In moments like this, collapse happens quickly. What makes misjudgment unravel so fast is that it depends on consistency. As long as reality aligns with expectation, the judgment remains intact. But when behavior contradicts the assumption, the entire structure begins to wobble. The mind realizes it trusted a conclusion that no longer explains what it is witnessing. That realization destabilizes everything built on top of it. Bruce Lee did not rush to expose this instability. He did not point out the error or draw attention to the misjudgment. He understood that exposing it directly would invite defensiveness rather than understanding. People resist being told they are wrong, but they cannot resist noticing when their certainty no longer makes sense. By remaining grounded, Bruce Lee allowed the contradiction to surface naturally. His composure did not align with the assumptions that had been made about him. That mismatch forced people to confront the gap between belief and reality on their own. Because the realization was internal, it carried more weight. The illusion that the situation was under control depended on predictability. Predictability reassures people that nothing unexpected will occur. Once predictability disappears, control feels imaginary. People begin to sense that they are no longer ahead of the moment. That sensation is deeply unsettling because it exposes how much comfort they derived from believing they were prepared. As the illusion of control faded, so did the ease that came with it. Comfort relies on certainty. When certainty weakens, comfort cannot remain. People became more aware of their surroundings, more cautious in their reactions, and more attentive to details they had ignored earlier. This shift did not come from fear, but from the realization that their understanding had been incomplete. Misjudgment collapses fast because it is unsupported by resilience. It does not evolve. It cannot adapt. It exists only as long as it remains unchallenged. When challenged indirectly, through contradiction rather than confrontation, it loses stability almost immediately. Bruce Lee's stillness accelerated this process. By not reacting, he removed every distraction that might have delayed recognition. There was no argument to focus on, no explanation to debate, no performance to interpret. The only thing left was reality quietly contradicting assumption. Once that contradiction became visible, the mind had no place to hide. The narrative that had felt so comfortable moments earlier now felt thin. People could sense that they had trusted their certainty too quickly, and that their confidence had been built on incomplete information. The collapse of misjudgment did not humiliate anyone. It simply clarified the situation. People realized that the control they thought they had was conditional, and once those conditions changed, it vanished. That realization arrived without force, without drama, and without announcement. This is why misjudgment collapses so fast. Not because someone exposes it aggressively, but because it cannot survive awareness. Once people recognize that their certainty was borrowed rather than earned, it dissolves on its own. And once comfort disappears, clarity takes its place. Bruce Lee did not need to disrupt the moment. He allowed it to correct itself. And in doing so, he revealed how fragile false confidence truly is when faced with a calm, grounded presence. Understanding did not arrive immediately. It arrived only after attention quietly returned to the moment it had abandoned. When people finally looked again, they did not see something new appear. They saw what had been there all along and realized they had failed to notice it. That delay mattered. It revealed that awareness had not been missing because the moment lacked significance, but because it had been dismissed too quickly. As attention sharpened, a realization formed without words. Seriousness is not always visible on the surface. It does not always announce itself through volume, size, or urgency. Capability does not arrive wearing signs or demanding recognition. Sometimes it enters quietly, waits patiently, and reveals itself only when others have exhausted their assumptions. People began to understand that their earlier confidence had been misplaced. They had trusted what felt familiar instead of remaining curious. They had relied on appearance instead of presence. That reliance had given them comfort, but it had also narrowed their perception. When awareness returned, it returned with weight, carrying the understanding that something important had been overlooked. What unsettled them was not embarrassment, but clarity. They realized that the mistake was not intentional disrespect. It was inattentiveness. They had not failed because they ignored someone deliberately. They failed because they decided, too early, that continued observation was unnecessary. In hindsight, this felt obvious. The calm they had dismissed now appeared deliberate. The restraint they had overlooked now appeared intentional. The composure that had once seemed insignificant now appeared controlled and self-possessed. The difference was not in what changed, but in how it was perceived. This realization arrived too late to alter the moment, but early enough to teach something lasting. People recognize that moments do not end simply because attention moves elsewhere. Reality continues whether it is being observed or not. When attention returns, it does not rewind. It confronts whatever has quietly developed in its absence. The presence of Bruce Lee had not demanded focus, but it had sustained itself without it. That endurance revealed something essential. True capability does not depend on being noticed at the right time. It remains intact regardless of recognition. People began to see that the most significant error was not misjudgment, but disengagement. The moment they stopped watching was the moment they surrendered understanding. They had trusted certainty over curiosity, comfort over awareness, and assumption over observation. That choice shaped everything that followed. The realization carried a quiet humility. It showed how easily perception can be narrowed and how quickly attention can drift when nothing seems to demand it. It also revealed how fragile certainty becomes once awareness returns. What once felt solid now felt thin. This understanding did not provoke regret. It produced insight. People recognized that keeping attention alive is a form of respect, not just for others but for reality itself. When attention fades, reality does not pause. It continues unfolding, often beyond the reach of those who believe they have already understood it. The lesson was simple but difficult to forget. Seriousness is not always loud. Capability does not always announce itself. And the most costly mistake is deciding too soon that there is nothing left to see. They had not failed because they ignored Bruce Lee. They failed because they stopped watching. By the time that realization settled, the moment had already passed, leaving behind a clearer understanding of how easily awareness can be lost and how quietly truth waits for attention to return. Nothing dramatic ended the moment. No final exchange. No clear signal that something important had happened. Yet the shift was undeniable. Awareness had returned too late, and with it came understanding that could not undo what had already been missed. What this moment reveals is simple but uncomfortable. Power does not always announce itself. Capability does not rush to be recognized. And the most dangerous assumption anyone can make is believing that observation is no longer necessary. The moment you stop watching, you stop learning. The moment you stop learning, you lose control without realizing it. This is not a lesson about one person being underestimated. It is a lesson about how easily attention drifts when comfort takes over, about how certainty silences curiosity, and about how often the truth waits quietly while people decide they already know enough. The room returned to normal. Life moved on, but the realization remained, because once you understand that awareness is the real advantage, you never forget how costly it is to let it go. That was the mistake.